Hello and welcome. My name is Steffen Giessner and I'm a professor of organization behavior and change. I would like to introduce my colleague Hodar Lam, PhD candidate in organization behavior. We are here on campus at Erasmus University in Rotterdam to discuss our research, understanding loneliness at work during COVID-19 and in the future. We are going to talk about the research and its practical applications to begin with, but we welcome your question, which we will address at the end. You can submit your questions during this broadcast by using the button at the right-hand side of the screen. You will have to log in with your email address to ask a question. Please know the session will be recorded, and I really thank you for joining us today. So I also would like to mention that the research we present here is supported by the Erasmus Center of Leadership. Please also have a look at our website just to see our activities and what else we do in our research for practice as well. So what are we doing today? We give you first a bit of an overview of the topic. So what is loneliness, why it's important, why politics has cared about that, what it implicates and so on. Then we have a little conversation where we discuss our research we have been conducted over the last 4 years. And we want to give you some recommendations based on that. And then we want to really discuss the questions from you. We're really looking forward to these questions to see how we can help you in your situations or what situations you actually face. I want to start with a quote from Carl Jung, a psychologist who said once, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself." As you can see from this quote, loneliness has a lot to do with conversation, with communication. It also refers a bit like, at the moment, lots of us feel like that we do not have much or didn't have much possibilities to communicate due to the COVID-19 crisis. But it also shows in a way that's a quite old quote. So loneliness is not just a topic just now. It has been an ongoing topic in our lives, but also in the business world. And Hodar will tell you now a few things more about that. So maybe first introduce yourself and then say us a bit about loneliness.
Yeah, thank you, Steffen. So hello, everyone. So thank you for joining us. And so I'm Hodar Lam, and I'm a final year PhD candidate, focusing on emotions and well-being issues in work and leadership. And particularly, as Steffen mentioned, we've been working together for 4 years on this topic of loneliness among leaders and among employees. So I'm really happy here that today that we have this opportunity to share our insights. So I'll first tell you a bit more about why we should care about this phenomenon, loneliness. So it is something that is that has received growing interest in both the society but also in the workplace. So I'll start with the societal level. So in UK, for example, the British Prime Minister Theresa May has actually set up this Minister for Loneliness 3 years ago. To tackle this loneliness pandemic. That's also how we term it these days. So the decision was actually motivated by two interesting findings. The first is that they estimate that there will be 9 million UK citizens who would always or often feel lonely in their lives. And the second finding was that, in general, they estimate that British children these days, they actually spend less time outdoors than prisoner inmates. So when we look at the adulthood population, it is estimated it is also quite a prevalent situation. So in general, there will be about 11% to 50% of adults who would suffer from loneliness issues chronically. And in the workplace, the practitioners have also paid a lot of attention to it. Some link it to burnout, and we are now in this strange, challenging situation with the COVID-19 pandemic. There's a lot of digital teams or working from home arrangements, and we could all relate to some extent of loneliness. And specifically, let's talk about the current situation that we are in. So some may estimate that the current challenges as posed by the COVID-19 pandemic would actually make us feel more lonely in our lives. So this recent community study conducted in the US has kind of shown the opposite. So they have been tracking a community of people from January to April this year across 3 time points. And they found that, there was no change actually in their loneliness trajectory from at the onset of the pandemic all the way to April. And additionally, they found that actually participants felt more social support during the process and also a sense of resilience, so the ability to bounce back from challenges during the COVID-19. So, of course, we would acknowledge that this study does not represent the full picture of the situation that we're in, especially the pandemic still going on. But it does show some optimism or some positive light of this pandemic. So it put us in a strange situation, but we actually could feel or perceive more social support or the connections among each other. But of course, maybe now, as some places the lockdown is still going on, it could be that there are people who feel a lot stressed because of this situation is not getting any better. So let's go back to loneliness itself. So what is it? So some people would assume that it's the same as being like isolated or being excluded. But the way scholars talk about it, they would define loneliness as an unpleasant emotional state, as stemming from a discrepancy between what we want and what we actually get. And drawing from an evolutionary perspective, we would assume that there are some adaptive functions of loneliness. So with a temporary or like a transient sense of loneliness, it actually signals us that we should reach out and get connected. And today, so I will, in the coming 5 to 10 minutes, I will first give an overview of what we know scientifically about loneliness at work. And then we will switch to this conversation between Steffen and me to talk about these questions, like what do managers think about loneliness? Is loneliness only an issue for those working digitally? And also practically what we can do about it. So what do we know from the literature or from the body of research evidence about loneliness at work? So there are 2 major sources of loneliness. One is from lacking meaningful relationships. So one good example would actually be the expatriates or the foreign employees who may be a high-risk group of feeling lonely at this challenging situation, because a lot of expatriates actually rely on their colleagues as their source of social support. So Other sources of lacking meaningful relationships could come from a poor social support network or poor social interactions. You know, sometimes there are office politics or, you know, subgroups, fault lines, etc. And it could also come from having strong role demands. But very often in the workplace, employees may feel lonely without being alone. And as a quote that I like very much, there's this quote that says, "But nothing makes a room feel emptier than wanting someone in it." So another source of loneliness is actually coming from our inner or internal high expectations on what we can get from the society. And a good example to illustrate this is that we may often assume that extroverted or outgoing people, they may be free from loneliness issues. But actually, that may not be the case because, especially in this pandemic situation, they are locked at home and so on. So they are used to or tend to expect a lot from social connections from the outside. And this situation actually put them in a case that their expectations are not met. And other sources of this building up this high social expectation could come from people having a lot of uncertainty about themselves, or some may actually prefer to maintain a distance from others, and then their expectations are lowered. So in that sense, they may be less likely to feel lonely. And so let's also talk about the impacts of loneliness at work to show why we should care about this topic in both management but also in our daily lives. So in the workplace, there are three areas of implications. So the first one is about performance. So research has shown that when employees feel lonely at work, they are more likely to perform worse, they could become less creative, and they are also less willing to go an extra mile, for example, to help others or take initiatives or speak up when they see problems at work. The second area is actually more about the behavior aspect. So lonely individuals, they may demonstrate some undesirable work behavior. For example, they may consider quitting their jobs, so having a high turnover intention because they don't feel connected at work. They may treat their colleagues in an unfriendly way, so there may be unfriendly interactions. Or sometimes there could also be unethical work behavior, so some kind of deviant behavior. So an example is that in Japan, for example, they found that some elderly actually steal things or shoplift because they feel lonely and they wanted the attention from the society. So indeed, loneliness could also drive some kind of undesirable behavior, which is a bit like paradoxical or ironic, but this is what research has told us. And the last aspect, and there's a lot of research in the psychology literature, which would be about their well-being concerns. So when employees, for example, when they chronically suffer from loneliness and they don't get the support that they need, they would suffer from physical and mental ill health issues, so more likely to be sick. And in general, in psychology, they have shown that loneliness actually predicts a higher death rate. And the second aspect, which is more connected to the workplace or the employees, would be a risk of burnout because of this chronic rumination or chronic thinking about I'm detached or I'm unconnected with my colleagues. And we have also this survey study that showed additionally to these well-being issues, some lonely employees, they may actually have sleep problems. So they may still have enough the number of sleeps, but then their sleep qualities could get worse. And another important aspect that I would like to draw here is that this topic of workplace loneliness is also something that practitioners care about. So if we take a walk into the bookstores, which may be harder these days, so let's go the online bookstores, for example, we see a lot of books that serve as guides to tell us how we can leave loneliness or feel less lonely. And also, we also noticed that there are a lot of books that specifically talk about loneliness among leaders. So, but when we reflect on the research evidence that we have, we still need to build up stronger evidence to understand how it happens. So right now we would have this conversation to talk about our research findings. So perhaps, Steffen, do you have any questions in your mind now?
So, I mean, I think it will be interesting what our project, so we started, like, as Hodar said, like 4 or 5 years ago with a project on studying loneliness. And actually, we focused at a time on leader loneliness. Why that? Because there also are books, and you find in the bookshops, which says it's lonely at the top. And so we've been exactly interested in that topic to begin with. So one of the studies we've been interested, or we have done actually, was actually with mid-level managers. And so here was the idea, let's just see what, when you are a leader, but you can still talk with somebody to the top, namely to your boss, or you can talk with somebody from your team, how this helps, because as Carl Jung said, it's important that you talk about your problems you have when you're lonely. So we look in how much these self-disclose and where self-disclosure works better in terms of reducing loneliness. So the interesting thing what we found that is it's good to talk. It's good to self-disclose your problems to both, to your team members, but also to your boss. So, but interestingly, self-disclosing to your boss seems to reduce loneliness a little bit more than self-disclosing to your team members. And another interesting facet we found is there are differences in these mid-level managers who actually engages in this self-disclosure, especially self-disclosure to your boss. Namely, these are these leaders who feel in a way self-confident because they have control over their job. So they feel like very much in control. They feel very much control in what they're doing. So probably like feel self-confident enough to really talk to their boss through of problems and issues they have. And it seems especially this discussing problems to your boss, to your upper management in a way, that helps reducing yourself, your loneliness feelings. And that's quite important and interesting insight, and also relates why it's lonely at the top, because primarily at the top, there is nobody, or it's harder to find somebody to talk your problems through. A friend and former colleague of mine, she was leading 3 hospitals, and in a way what she was reporting, I mean, she really enjoyed her job being a manager of these hospitals, but at the same time she would only meet once a year with the holding to actually discuss these problems, or at least report the numbers, not even discuss these problems.
That's a pity.
But all the rest in a way of things she would have to do, she would have to decide herself. So these are like the situations when there is no real boss to discuss things through, and that's why probably leaders feel sometimes lonely at the top. The good message is, so for most of us, or for many of us, we certainly likely have still a leader in place. So we have a chance of reducing loneliness. And why might this be the case, that if we self-disclose ourselves to our boss, why might this be so helpful? I think they're like different ideas why this might be the case. That's probably the next step in our research we have to do. But first of all, if I discuss my issues I have, why I feel lonely with my boss, it's helpful because the boss might be able to respond on that and react on that. I can tell from my own situation now, I'm heading of a department, and so if colleagues have problems and they talk to me about these problems, I can at least try to react as good as possible to support them to solve some of their work pressure, for instance. Another issue is that if you feel lonely, that might also come to a situation where sometimes you feel like you might not doing your job good enough. So also the effects it has, for instance. So you might not do a good job. You might not doing enough. And
a lot of self-doubt.
If you discuss to your boss in a way, that might relieve some of the pressure, because you might also feel to a certain degree guilty to your boss. You might feel like, I'm doing not a good job, I do not know what to do. So just maybe sharing that information and your boss acknowledging that might already give you a certain type of relief. It does not take everything away, but that's also not what we say here. But if you self-disclose to your boss, he or she might acknowledge that, and that might give you the relief that, it's accepted that in a moment I'm stressful, I cannot get along, I don't know what to do, I cannot work as much as I would do. So, and some of these negative feelings potentially that relate to loneliness can be also reduced used to that. So that's why, especially talking to your boss might be a very helpful thing in reducing loneliness. And I found it a very fascinating finding we had in this research. I know, Hodar, you also, you've done that research, but also I know, and we've done this together, but you have been interviewing managers on different levels, lower levels, higher levels, also male and female managers, on their experience in the workplace on loneliness and how they understand, or what actually understand under loneliness. Because we talk all the time about loneliness, but is it just one thing? What is loneliness in the eyes of these managers?
Sure. First of all, I would like to add to what you have talked about on this survey study. And so we chose to focus on mid-level managers. And from the interviews that I've done, and first of all, I really have to thank all these managers who took the time to speak to me, and they were really open about their experiences and also how they reflect on these experiences. And that was really inspiring. So one of the things that kind of like echoed is that the difficulty or the challenges in mid-level management is that they often have this feeling of being caught in between. But also when you mentioned just now this negativity, and sometimes, and there was this scholar, David Frost, and he called mid-level management as the toxic handler, in the sense that they are mid-level management is expected to absorb negativity both from above and from below. So having this outlet to talk to their superiors, for example, is actually symbolic that they are not this absorbent that have to take in all the negativity. And so back to your question on how managers sees loneliness. So indeed, loneliness is a subjective experience. So we could be very well surrounded, we could have very nice team members, but we could still feel lonely at times. And there are two major findings from the interviews that I've conducted. So one is that very often managers may feel temporarily or for a short period of time lonely because of they are caught in situations to make difficult decisions, such as layoffs or dealing with difficult employees. Sometimes even there are lawsuits involved. So there is very limited things that they could do, but also to discuss for clarity or for more affirmation or confidence in their decisions. And the second finding that we see is that a lot of managers, they actually build up their internal scripts of how an ideal leader should be like, and that kind of determine or at least trigger whether they see loneliness as something that is very surprising or shocking in their daily lives. So an example would be some leaders may see that ideal leadership is about being very task-driven, very about numbers, results, and so on. So they may still feel lonely in their daily interactions, but then that may not come as a surprise. So it is kind of easier to cope because of this leadership ideal. And there are some who are very relationship focused or very communal, and then they invest a lot of time disclosing or having regular meetings, weekly meetings with individual members. Some informants really lead big teams, and then their weeks, half of it or maybe more, is about meeting individual followers. So they invested a lot of time and energy in building these relationships with their followers. But then it could be a surprise because when these interactions are not reciprocated. So it could be that their followers just take in all the feedback and then they just move on with their daily lives. Or they also don't get the kind of similar investment or attention from their superiors. So in that sense, communal or very relationship-driven leaders sometimes would see loneliness as a surprise. I've invested so much in building relationships, but why don't I get it? And then there are also some leaders who are a bit like an unsung heroes. So they may do a lot for their colleagues, defending them, or maybe at times of restructuring, they try to keep their jobs for their team members, and then but then their contributions may not be openly recognized or appreciated. But because they have created meaning in their teams or in their work, so they may still feel lonely, but then the experience is less intense or less surprising because they know that even though they are now in a lonely position, but they have done something good for their team members. So these would be how we could tell from what leaders would think about loneliness at work. Yeah. And so, Steffen, I understand that, besides what we have been working on, you've also been involved, very interested in the digital work environment and the work life there.
Yeah.
So can you tell us more about, is loneliness an issue for people working digitally? I think a lot of audience have this question in mind.
Yeah, so I mean, it's the topic, in a way, we've been researching this already for 4 years. I also started a different project on digital teams with my colleague Sudi Wong from the BEI Norwegian Business School on digital teams. And now the COVID crisis makes that even more interesting. So that research has been not being started as addressing this COVID crisis, but I think the insights in that are very interesting. Because what we can expect in the future is that we work more digital. We had like a real fast learning that digital work is possible. I just read in the news this morning that Siemens, who has been traditionally very much focusing on working, or that the stuff comes into their office, now plans after the crisis that they will do homework more. So really changing the culture on that. And I guess we will see that more for different reasons, for various reasons. So there will be likely more digital work. It's also not such a new thing. I mean, we have been working digitally in one way or the other. So email is nothing new. So, but I think the last couple of months where those people who do homework, those people who could do homework, I must say, I know some who had kids at home were not, cannot easily work at all. But those who do work from home now and interact with their teams experienced already what it really means to have digital work and not seeing each other face to face. And so we studied actually teams in a company who've done that already before the COVID crisis. So who work in a digital team. Across different countries. So these teams consisted out of members where some are actually in the same building, but most of the conversations that happen was digitally. And what we've been interested in, so we haven't really been focused there on loneliness, but on something like what we called helplessness, which really relates to loneliness and really speaks to that. So it's their feeling of how much they feel helpless in their job, which likely has an impact on how much they feel lonely. And we've been interested in how much they communicate. So objectively, how often on a day and a week do they actually have contact with team members? How often do they engage? Also using sources of communication that are richer. And on the one hand, we looked at this part. On the other hand, we looked at, do they know what their job is all about? Is there ambiguity in the task they have currently? So it's probably not, I shouldn't say that the job is all about, it's the task they have now to do, the project they're running, the daily business they have to do. Do they know what to do? And what we found is it becomes problematic when both are low. So when you do not really have clarity about your job, so when there's high ambiguity about what you should do at a moment, and at the same time there's not much communication going on. There's not much exchange with your boss, but also with your team members. So that really makes sense. That people feel helpless in that situation. So, but it also points to that you can reduce that feeling of helplessness and potentially loneliness then if you actually start really clarify as a boss of a team, as a supervisor, what the tasks are. And clarify that for everybody. And at the same time also better if you also increase your communication at a time. Because one thing is to say, and I can share that experience now as many of you, I guess, as well. I can share that as in my own situation now, leading a team of scientists and teachers. We switched now all to online tools. We learned a lot of online tools which are out there, fortunately. But we on the one hand, there is an increase in the communication. Over the last couple of the frequency. There's much more communication. At the same time, I think also honestly, we might underestimate how much communication we used to have when we meet face to face, because we had all this informal communication. You know, when you meet in a coffee corner, when you go for lunch together, all of this is not any longer present. So if you work in digital teams, you really need to communicate a lot and have a lot of this communication. And that helps as well in as much as clarifying jobs. You can imagine if you are at home and there's not many people communicating to you and you do not really know what to do. That can be a very confusing situation. So there are at least two things one can easily address to reduce that, namely clarify the job, clarify the task, clarify what need to be done, and have more conversation, more than you, I guess, expect, because you really have to compensate a lot when you do not have that face-to-face communication, especially all of this informal one, where a lot of people might currently have increased their, let's say, formal communication tools online, to cover the informal communication which normally we have around. It's an interesting question, I guess, also for future research to address whether this really covers that. And I assume from my own experience, I'll do a bit on that, but it might be still not enough. And it feels already like a lot of work for me doing all of this communication. But I think that is actually something really interesting, and that it will also matter more for the future. I guess we also experienced all like a learning process, and there will be some adaptations. But still, we need a lot of communication. That is also, again, referring to the quote from Jung. And we need clarity as well on when it comes to our work, at least, what we need to do.
And to add to that, there's also we also underestimate that there's also a lot of loss of nonverbal signals or cues in the digital conversations. So, for example, we could see each other, but then all these gestures or also like the emotional expressions, these are all lost, and these are the things that before the pandemic, we didn't think about it, but then we kind of took it for granted, and now it all surfaced that we do need these nonverbal cues to facilitate the conversations.
And that's indeed the case. So it's quite interesting as well on this experience now. I mean, we don't see each other 3D; we see each other two-dimensional. We see our upper part only. So we read a lot from the nonverbal part of, especially how you're doing. We might also misinterpret a lot because now we're sitting, typically we're standing, so that gives a different energy level as well. So all of that part is definitely gone as well in a virtual world. Again, we can adjust a little bit and we can learn to it a bit, but especially in this first phase of change, that's quite impact it can make. So I agree with that.
So. Can I just follow up with the question? So what do you think about, so you've conducted this study with this company in Norway, right? So what does it mean for teams that work across time zones?
So especially, I mean, these teams where you work across time zones, that, how often can you communicate? So that's quite difficult. So you can see, you can work on the ambiguity of the job. You can make the job more clear. So that's one thing you can definitely do. But the way of amount of communication, so especially the synchronous communication, that might be reduced. But I mean, you can make small videos, So you can make small videos and send them to another person instead of just an email. I mean, if people like us use tools of communicating with our smartphones, we used to type. Now we send text messages very often. So and the younger generation now even use more videos. So this is probably something we can. It's more richer. So that's something you can do. So even there, you might be restricted in the amount of communication you can do and how much you can increase it. But you can still in these boundaries, you can probably still
play around.
Bring it at the upper boundaries as much possible in the quality maybe, and still in the amount maybe possible. So, but you are sometimes restricted. But in these contexts, I think then the clarity of the work you have is then even very important. So I've heard there's some questions, so maybe we can take on some questions already.
Sure.
So can you let us know some of these? So first question I see here is, as an employer or manager, how can you understand whether people, when working from home, feel lonely? So it's an excellent question because it kind of connects already to this nonverbal part, which it can be even harder to recognize that because it feels that the interaction is different between a manager and an employee on this online thing. I mean, the first thing you can do is you can, in the conversation you have, you can just directly ask how you feel, how you're doing, and whether there are issues. And I think, I mean, you first have to ask directly in the hope that the person discloses that. And I think it's important, actually, also even to address that issue in the conversations nowadays. Especially what I also see is like, you know, we are now in a phase where we have a lot of colleagues who are in this risk group of the COVID-19 crisis, who really now, the longer this crisis go and the more uncertain the future becomes on, you know, when will this all be over? Or even the uncertainty of, you know, everything relaxes, but I feel still uncertain. And to not have so much contact, that, you know, these people experience a lot of these issues now. So I think it's first reaching out from our side. It would be ideal. I mean, that's what we suggest here, that the employee, every employee, that what we would recommend here should actually reach out to his or her boss or supervisor and talk about that, self-disclose him or herself. But it's a good question that actually as a supervisor or manager or leader yourself, you might just also check in. It's harder because, you know, from my own experience, the communication we communicate now a lot online. There's lots more meeting. So we feel like we already, you know, there's an increase in that. To reach everybody is not easy. So especially also, for instance, this informal conversation is not there. So sometimes if people tell us, you know, maybe check with this person or so, that might also not get through any longer as good. So one way could be also maybe just to also establish some more informal platforms of conversation with your team. So not just use the official, I don't know what tool you use for your video conferencing, but maybe have an unofficial platform where people can exchange and chat a bit, and that via these chats also some of these issues emerges and then maybe get on your plate and you find out about these things. And the follow-up question is, what can employers and managers do to support people at home that potentially feel lonely? And I think there we can also say some of the things what we would recommend based on our research, but also based on the science we've learned over the last couple of years. So maybe you want to start on a few points what we would recommend.
Sure. So the first would be to, as Steffen, you have introduced our study on self-disclosure of managers, and the first recommendation would be to really engage in self-disclosure, especially when you feel comfortable and you have enough trust in the relationship, then really take the initiative to open up, both upwards and downwards, but also to peers, to reach out to peers. Like again, going back to what loneliness as an emotion functions, it's really about signaling us or reminding us that we should reach out for connections. The second recommendation would be about, so at the core of loneliness is about our understanding of whether the relationships we have are meaningful. So one of the idea that we have is that we could actually create meaning when we are feeling lonely. So one practical suggestion would be we could help others, and through helping others, so for example, I illustrated with this unsung hero group of leaders, they may feel lonely as well, but then when they see that their work is meaningful or they are actually helping others, it could be like even colleagues that are unrelated or not your direct reports, you know, through joining mentoring schemes. Like these days, there are actually a lot of platforms or opportunities for digital talks about like what's the next step in this insecure job market or career path development. So in short, like when we feel lonely, we could actually consider to do something to give to others to create meaning in our interactions.
Which I can add on that, because relating to the question again, if you as a leader or manager wants to find out and maybe finds out one of your colleagues or one of your team members feeling lonely, you might discuss with him or her that he or she can also help to find out whether others feel lonely. That gives, in a way, meaning, because suddenly there's a task which gives sense, which gives meaningfulness. And that colleague might also be actually potentially find it easier to find out with other colleagues, how they feel. Maybe sometimes it's if there's a bit more distance between the leader and the manager and the employees or the team members, that they will not tell everything. That might be helpful if you have like one of that person, or you find out, and that person in a way can help you talking with others in the team, and then give them as a task to support. That might actually reduce the loneliness of that person. At the same time, it might be another way of finding out you as a leader, or help you as a leader find out who else might have issues with loneliness, and then to chat with them.
Yeah, indeed. And another point or another suggestion would be actually thinking about the good old times help, so nostalgia. So we could, for example, think about the nice outing that we had in the team, or maybe, and actually there's also some evidence showing that actually comfort food, so food that actually gives us memory or give us associations of the good old times, actually also help reducing loneliness. So these are some practical tips to try out.
Nostalgia is certainly a thing that might not hold on for so long, but for a moment, why not? So I just, with a friend, I like to go to concerts, and nowadays, this is not any longer possible, where lots of people are in a room. So we recently just watched a concert, and we felt like, these are the old times when we were able to go to concert. At least for the moment, it felt good, and it helps a bit. I mean, even if it's short term, sometimes it can be very helpful to have something that in the moment helps a bit to reactivate these people. Because it's, as you said, also the effects of loneliness seems to be also like going in the loop of becoming more and more down. So sometimes these small helps can also be helpful in change. And stopping that way downwards, and maybe stabilizing, and maybe also initiating a way upwards again with some additional conversations, and motivations. So another question is, you suggest, I read the question, you suggest talking to your boss may be a good way of dealing with feelings of loneliness. What if the boss does not have the emotional capacity to deal with your feelings? Wouldn't the strategy potentially backfire if you only feel worse after a bad reaction from your boss? Definitely a good question. So definitely when we talk about our research and our findings, it's not like that we say that this is like true for everybody. Would say over a larger population that should help, but in the individual case, it could be exactly like that you have a boss who is
suboptimal.
Who's suboptimal to say. So he's not the person you really think you should talk to. Or you might even then try to talk to after we giving this advice here, and then you feel like this is not what I expected, this is not what I wanted. What would be your suggestion for if you have that situation?
So first of all, I think indeed addressing this or echoing this question, and thank you very much for submitting this question, because that's also a point that we want to make, is that so there's also a fine line, or there should be a line about to what extent that there are certain topics that we can't self-disclose. So especially when there are disclosure that are like less than appropriate, or even like potentially unethical, then these disclosure could also backfire. So for example, sharing things that actually challenge how others have been looking at you. So for example, people would assume that I am a very moral, ethical person, and I disclose something that is something that I did that shows that I actually have low moral values. So these kind of disclosures could backfire. I would say that it is so if this disclosing to your direct supervisor is not possible, then we should still be open and to look for other sources of disclosure, like an upper level of management, as like other supervisors or other leaders that are within the company who may understand the situation and provide support. Another source would be to actually talk to some professionals like executive coaches. And very often, and that is also what we've noticed in the practitioner literature, is that very often when people talk about loneliness and in leaders, it was very easily linked to seeking executive coaching. So one of the functions of coaching is that besides driving performance or driving development, is also to raise our awareness of what the emotions or the experiences mean to us. So maybe we are just labeling it as loneliness because it's also a subjective interpretation. But it may be about something else. Maybe it's about like I don't feel that I'm in a legitimate control situation, or maybe I'm just anxious, very uncertain. So there may be some. So loneliness may be sometimes at the tip of the iceberg, but having someone like an executive coach or other professionals to talk about and to make sense of what loneliness really means to us could also help.
I also would like to add on that. We basically say self-disclose, yeah? So I think self-disclosure is one tool, and you can in a way decide to whom you want to do that. Yeah? So as Carl Jung said, it's important that you talk about it. Yeah? And so in that sense, you have a choice of with whom you want to self-disclose. From our research, we would say it's not a bad idea just to at least check with yourself, with your guts potentially. Might it be your boss? Yeah? If you're quite certain that this is not the right person, then you might not do that. If you're uncertain, you might give it a try if you feel yourself certain enough. I mean, in our study, we found that these, in our case, we had mid-level managers, but these who feel confident, who feel like having control in their job, they are the ones who primarily talk also to their bosses then. So if you might feel certain enough, then you should try that. If you do not feel certain enough, then we would probably recommend maybe you can talk to your colleagues, you can talk to your other team members if you have some below you. You also have maybe family. I mean, there are more, or you have some official persons you can go to. The point would be, ideally would say self-disclose, talk to somebody. But we also said another way could be, if you can get your motivation up, because loneliness has this kind of slight negatively low energy, what it brings with it, so in your feelings, then it's actually also one way, if you can bring a bit of energy back, that you try to help others who have the same feeling, because this gives this meaningfulness back. That can be also one way. From the digital teams, we also know that communicating a lot in a way that relates potentially to, in this communication, you might self-disclose, helps a lot, as well as knowing exactly what you should do. So there are, in a way, different things. And maybe you can bring some nostalgic ideas just for the moment. But we definitely would also not say, if you already know that you have a boss, where it's likely you get an answer that would be rather harm than help, then you shouldn't self-disclose to that person. But also, if you're in a situation where you're uncertain and you feel like, okay, I can try, and if I get a response which is not as nice, I can live with that, then you should give it a try. Maybe your leader is better than you expect. So that might be also sometimes the case.
Sometimes leaders are just torn apart by stress and limited time.
Maybe they need your help as well. So maybe this is the first person you can help, actually. Okay, one more question. What if you are in an environment where there's no appreciated to say I'm lonely? So what if you work in a context where, like, talking about these issues, this is like a very sensitive issue, a very you don't want to appear as weak. So what would we recommend in that context?
I think in general, not only loneliness itself, but also a spectrum of negative emotions like sadness or sometimes anger or frustration. They in certain company cultures, I would say, it's quite stigmatized. Like it's almost like a shame or guilt to talk about or to even like if you're experiencing these negative emotions, like it's almost this you'll be penalized for talking about it or thinking about it. So this would be actually our recommendation for organizations as a whole to work on these stigmas or these almost like making negative emotions in general as a taboo topic. So we would recommend organizations to actually engage more like internal communications, having these, for example, like well-being platforms or forums to talk about the negative sides of their work experiences. And because sometimes it may not be an individual issue, but actually something may be going wrong within the team or within the organization. So I would say, but for those who are unfortunate, who are trapped in, let's say, more cold, emotionally cold work culture, then it's really about still like looking for appropriate sources of disclosures. So I understand that, like, for example, a lot of CEOs, for example, there's this study in Australian hotel industry, the CEOs, and they found that, like, of course, they are competitors, but for those who actually reach out to other networks of CEOs, so other networks of executives, their hotels perform better. So it's really about like having this flexibility. If this path of getting the kind of connection or quality relationship does not work, then maybe reach out, like shift to another industry or shift to another like peer support network. So that would be my take on that.
Yeah, and I would probably add, I mean, I very much like what you say, that changing culture, but it sounds always easy.
Yeah.
But if you're in the role of managing a team, at least you can be a role model. Yeah. So you can tell yourself to your team that maybe some of these feelings you have, just to open up this opportunity, at least in the context of your team. You might not just be able for the whole organization immediately, but if you can do it for your team, do it for your team. If you're now not in this role, you feel like, as you say, trapped, you can reach out. One option could be also to ask yourself, is this the right context where I would work in? So is this something that I can, for a longer period of time, do my job? Now, if we even think now of the future, that who knows what happens when this crisis is over, work life will be looking different. I'm quite certain about this. I'm quite certain that there will be more digital use of that. We can think about office space. It's also expensive. It makes sense to reduce that. There's also we now all learned, I think all organizations learned it's possible. Not the organization learned that they can leave their stuff working from home, but we ourselves learned it's possible. So there might also be this kind of work a bit more like that is now, maybe a hybrid, we would say, and that will happen to lots of workplaces, I guess. And in that sense, it might also be sometimes good to reflect, your own power, you could say so, to decide maybe I want to work in a different work culture. If this is not a work culture where I fit personally fit in, then over a longer period of time, within this crisis or after that crisis, that could have an impact on your life. And do you want to allow that? It's like all of us, in a way, I guess, feel it. Some cultures, organizational cultures, might restrict it. And some people do better in that, not working. But generally, I think there's nothing wrong talking about issues we have, and all of us feel that. So I think a bit openness is good. It's not like that we do not say this culture implies that you talk all the time about like all the emotional feelings you have here. It's not like this. But sometimes you have this, I really feel like I don't know what to do. It's just like sometimes these feelings. And if you have this feeling, somebody grabs that and understands that and helps you in that, there's definitely a very powerful feeling, And in the end, we're working now much more on teams, So in teams means we cooperate, we help each other, So that's what we need. And so if this is not the culture you experience, or not enough of culture you experience, that might be also a choice to think, how do we go on with that?
Indeed.
Okay, so maybe we should summarize on the things what we have talked about today. So what can we do on managing loneliness during a COVID-19 crisis, but also I think beyond, we think beyond. So the first thing of our take-home message is appreciate these meaningful relationships. Appreciate that there are relationships which need to be managed in a context, and these are important. And especially when you work now digitally a lot, managing that is quite tricky. We need these kind of relationships to manage, and there are different ways how we can do that. So this self-disclosure is one way we need to talk about it. As a manager, maybe as a role model, show this openness, that maybe talk about yourself about this. Also check in with some of your colleagues, how they feel. And if you're yourself in a situation, if you feel like you can talk with your boss, or it might be good to talk with your boss, try out and talk with your boss. Contact him or her and get in touch with them. A second thing might be also, you might be motivated to help yourself, which is quite a surprising thing, because when you think about loneliness, it feels more like I need the help. I need help. But actually, if you think about it, if you start giving yourself help for others, it brings you back a lot of meaning, and that in a way is a very good thing. So that we would also say is very helpful. I just see another question we got just in between. I will read that for us. Picture a situation, fresh graduate, starting employment during the pandemic, when communication only happens online, 100% formal, 0% informal, and the work is currently remote. He or she has no connections to the firm at all. How could this employee survive emotionally through the new job? Indeed, it's an excellent question, because I also had
the future.
I had it might be the future even. I had a master student who was doing the study and internship, and also that was the case, that the whole internship was like that. So maybe you want to start having an idea on how to deal with that.
Yeah, sure. I think for this, so I think it is really an unfortunate situation. So indeed, I wouldn't say there is a lot that this particular employee could do, but one way, and I know it may sound a bit tricky, but it would be really managing your own expectation. And that's also the case for not only for the pandemic situation, but also for leaders who just started taking up their leadership positions. So these would be from the interviews that we have conducted, is that it's also about managing your own expectation on what you can actually realistically get with the circumstances that you are in. And so that would be my suggestion for this unfortunate employee. But I also think it is the time that the organization should rethink their more formalized support network for their employees. So for example, a lot of companies have their mentoring systems or mentoring schemes. But are they really well adapted to the changing work forms? Like now that there's a lot of digital teams, so how could, for example, human resources or organizations management in general adapt their or structure their mentoring schemes to make it as an alternative support bubble or support system for employees who are starting their career, which they probably have a lot of questions, and also they need a lot of clarity in their tasks, roles, responsibilities.
Yeah, I might also add on that that probably that person is not alone in that situation.
Yeah,
so
indeed.
He or she might also check with the company, are there others who have the same, start the same, in the same situation, and maybe set up with them a kind of a network, use WhatsApp or Slack or whatsoever, or have some sessions on Zoom, Skype, or whatever is around there, just to meet them more informally, at least that at least then you have a common fate with a group and you can share already with them the same feelings, That might be one way. But I also completely agree with you. It will be, it's a new thing HR also has to catch up now.
Yeah, indeed.
And that will still maybe take some while. But as fast as we have been able to learn and switch over the last couple of weeks and months, we might be able to do something on this as well. And so managers probably also have to learn more to check in with you and not just offer the formal way, but also offer informal ways of interacting, and that would be the task, For yourself being in a situation, I would probably recommend just ask your manager or ask the HR from the company, are there others in that situation, and can we set up a group of the ones who have this common fate and share, at least in these groups, some informal fate to reduce that.
Yeah.
There's one more question. What can boards do to put in place policies or processes to facilitate the identification of loneliness in the digital workplace and then provide appropriate support? So the question is boards, or what kind of policies can be done in an organization? I might start on that question here, saying, so one of the things that also, and now we reflect more on our own learning, so it's not like that we know it all immediately, but I think what Erasmus University has done, we've done also employee surveys in the time of COVID-19, and we've done actually one extra employee survey in the time of COVID-19, where we included also actually a question on loneliness, but also some other health-related questions, just to get a first grip on what's going on and how do people feel in that crisis, and who also is especially hit by that feeling of loneliness.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the highest group
So
level.
some of these maybe not surprising first finding is that that probably has much even more stronger effects for internationals because they do not have like the social networks at all. Not all of them again, yeah. But it might be one of the things. If you're not an international, you kind of miss your family and your social network and
Originally, friends are at work,
Yeah.
but some,
Yeah.
indeed.
Yeah, so that is a problem. So, just running a survey in your company, just finding out like how bad is it. Also, as Hodar just reported, like there's a survey done in the US in a way surprisingly showed there was not so much impact on loneliness itself in that time. So that might also be happening. So you might be fine as a company, but you might also find out, okay, there is an increase in loneliness. We also can see which are the risk groups by that. You can still make it anonymous, but at least, for instance, see certain departments or can have some classifications based on that, just to get a better grip on that. And then based on these insights, can start off thinking about the policies you can implement, whom to address and what to address. I mean, we just talked about HR might actually rethink, an onboarding schema. We introduced a nice onboarding scheme, I think like 1 or 2 years ago here, but now this onboarding has to go online. Nobody has thought of that like this way.
Yeah.
So this has to be rethought. And like just the question we had of somebody just starting in the company, 100% formal. Yeah. So how do we deal with that? So it's a new thing. Yeah? So and it needs new policies certainly on that. But our recommendation, you need just to ask your staff and just doing an employee survey. If you have one normally planned, and do an extra one in this time now, just to find out and find out the risk groups. And from there on, you can start off certain interventions or certain policies that might be implemented.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Indeed, I also just to add on that, I also had employee opinion survey in mind, but I would also recommend to track the changes over time. So maybe it's not only about having 1 or 2 times of surveys, but actually at times of like changes and crisis, actually the management could show more of their presence through more actively monitoring or tracking the changes over time. So that's one, and it's also important, to think about, if we only have one time of a survey to look at, who is lonely or not. It may very well be that these people, there are some people who are more predisposed or more vulnerable to loneliness. So we are then we are just identifying the vulnerable people or those with a high, more stable sense of or more chronically lonely. Those with high, more chronically lonely at work, but we wanted to see, with time, with changes, indeed, reflecting on this pandemic situation. It's only happened for a few months, but so many things have changed. Yeah. So indeed, having more multiple time points to track the changes would be useful for management to get better insights. Yeah,
it's probably especially good for companies who already have employee surveys at least yearly or bi-yearly in place. They can make use of these data in a way as metrics.
Yeah.
Another question, should digital teams schedule social gatherings online besides work-related meetings? For example, host virtual lunches for employees where the primary purpose is to hang out rather than work? Actually, now reflecting on ourselves, or myself, I haven't done it too often, but I would say it's a good idea. We started actually in ourselves, and when the crisis started, we had these virtual coffees, we called it, indeed. And I know from other departments here, they also started some of these more social events, also making celebrations. If there's something to celebrate, to come together. And I think, yes, you should do that. And you should check how it goes. Yeah. So I had a feeling it was disappearing maybe from both sides a bit. Like people get busy again with all lots of work. Yeah. But yeah, we should do this. And I mean, we ourselves we introduced let's say one platform where all the the more official conversations goes through, and we have another platform where all informal conversation goes through, where people can also create different types of groups in there. So that also helps this informal conversation. And you should have social gatherings. Yeah. Yeah, it's at least nice. I mean, it can compensate for a little bit of that. It cannot compensate for full, but yeah, it would be good to build this up and keep it and see how it goes. I mean, in our case, it started. Probably we have to reignite that. It's a good point that somebody reminds me or us on that.
We are going to do that today.
Yeah. So, but I think it's a good point. And yes, we would probably say yes. Do that. It doesn't cost anything. Yeah. So people who want to come, we have some activities here at our university as well. There's a group who the Force is called. They're actively engaging and lots of different tools and people. At least these people who miss that, who want to have this energy, maybe the extroverted persons or so, who need a bit more contact, offering them the opportunity is a good thing. Yeah. One more question. What people can do to realize they are feeling lonely? Sometimes the feeling are mixed and not clear. What are any ideas?
Yeah, sure. So actually, I would say that listen to your body more. That would be a very strong message that I don't think people talk about it often enough. So very often, so when we think about emotions and feelings, so emotion is something that is like something that is like a step one in our brain or in our mind going on, and then it usually triggers some body reactions. And then we have this thinking process, and then we conclude or maybe give labels to, oh, I'm feeling lonely, or I'm feeling scared, or I'm feeling worried, or I'm feeling excited. So we often just focus on the labels that we have created internally, but we have ignored what our bodies are telling us. So, so for example, for loneliness, so there's this nice body scanning study done in the US that they scanned like people with different emotions, and they found that loneliness has this unique activation, like more at the heart level. And then, and then it's different from like other types of emotions like sadness or fear. So indeed, like when you feel something that is like it's blocking or something that you feel like trapped in the heart, I can't really like find the right words to describe the body feelings. But then sometimes our bodies are telling us things more than we normally think we do. And so that would be like more like, and this is basically how like a lot of this evidence of like mindfulness work, right? So paying attention to here and now. So what your body, senses and so on. So that would be my suggestions here.
Yeah. And I guess, I mean, talking to somebody, you might just find out whether it's loneliness. I think there's no harm in what we suggest here. There's also no tips and there's no surprises, I guess. But also these things do not harm. So I mean, if you want to find out, versus loneliness, if you probably start talking with somebody, you will actually probably find out by yourself talking about these kind of mixed feelings. And that might be another way to go for. So I think there's never a harm to talk with somebody through that. If you feel it's not your boss, as we said already, then you might not do it with your boss. But if you can do it with a good friend, and a good thing with the digital world, I mean, you can reach now a lot of friends, to the same degree as you reach your colleagues or your neighbor. You can reach out now to a lot of other people as well, because we seemingly lots of us are online nowadays. Another question: is loneliness just a part of the COVID situation? Will we have it in the future too?
I would say that it is something that is more like some philosophers would argue that it is something that is like a universal human conditions, like it's one of the fears or anxieties that we have to struggle the whole life. So I don't think it is only about the COVID situation. And indeed, like everyone's experience during the COVID situations is different. So it's a simple distinction is like local versus international employees. They may both be feeling lonely at a certain point, but then their sources or the meaning of their loneliness could be different. So looking forward or looking in the future, indeed, like there will be more like a shift or more transformation to a more digital work environment. So indeed, we have to think about like the loss of, all these nonverbal and also informal conversations, especially, for example, in industries that require more creativity or more innovation. Then how are we going to tackle that to adjust the kind of like the informal connections to keep the ball rolling?
So and I would also add to that. I mean, it's. We had the quote from Carl Jung.
Yeah.
So that was like more like the beginning of last century or mid of last century that he made this quote. And so it's not a new thing. Yeah, that loneliness has been around there. We started 4 or 5 years ago, not knowing that the COVID crisis would come.
Yeah.
Also, the results suggest the COVID crisis didn't hit. At least in this one study that went until April, it didn't hit so much an increase in loneliness. So probably we as humans are also very much adaptable. Yeah. So we can learn that, we can find other ways. Yeah. So probably lots of people self-disclose themselves in one way or the other already to reduce that. So do we have to expect in the future? Yes, we have. I guess it will always be there as it has been before. Does the COVID crisis has a specific twist on that? We don't know yet, actually. Interestingly, it might also, as some results suggest, might not being as bad.
Yeah.
But there's definitely variations, I guess, here. And some groups hit harder than others, yeah? So that's also like the survey we had here within Erasmus University, that some of the international might be hit a bit harder, international students, for instance, international, than others. So in that sense, there might be some specificity to the COVID-19 crisis, but we'll definitely have loneliness thereafter, and we have to manage that, yeah? And it has been there before, but it's one of the issues, and it's a good issue to address in a general sense, and also after that. And also, as you said, as the digitalization will probably be present after the crisis, we have to see what it means and who is hit by that then. One more question. During Corona crisis, many employees' tasks have changed. How to provide clarity when things are changing quickly and unexpectedly? So it's a good question, yeah. So this is lots of people struggle with that, yeah. Especially, if you, for instance, if you're in sales and you cannot meet anybody or you cannot sell anybody at the moment, you cannot go to conferences any longer. All of these things suddenly change. So what are the new jobs you have to do? Suddenly you have to give webinars. We are in a webinar, which is a new task for us, yeah. So and how do you describe that? There's no straightforward answer, and because you first have to find out yourself. So what are the new tasks? Yeah, what should you do? What can we do in this crisis situation? How can we switch work? What will be the new way? You can use your team to discuss that and fix that from a bottom-up approach, also get the input from others and building it up. And I would recommend that. As some of my research is also on change management, I would definitely recommend take some time and talk it through from bottom-up and include these opinions to create a better way forward. And if you don't have it, you have to build it up now. Yeah, you have to define it. You have to also find out with your employees. Then, is it clear for you what you have to do? Are the new tasks clear? But this is a task you have to do now. And I think, it's a good question. And the answer would be, it's a task forward on your agenda if you're a manager now, and best do this with your team and build it up and check in with your team whether there's clarity on the task now. Yeah? But certainly it depends also now what are you as a company on your work environment, what are the jobs you can currently do, what are the jobs that make sense, and probably your team can help you, you on your position can help you, your boss can help you on that. Yeah. So feels like if you feel lonely with this question, we would say reach out to your boss, I guess. Yeah.
Perhaps I could also ask Steffen and to tell us more. So I know that you have done some work on like vision and empowerment, right? So sometimes like when people over-empower, so people get over-empowered and there's no task structure as well. Perhaps there's also some insights we could tell from understanding leaders' vision or empowering process. Yeah.
So I mean, it's like. Especially if you have this unclarity in task at the moment, and you want to hand over somebody the task or not. So you really have to, is again a moment in time to discuss that with your employees, how much task they can take on, and how much task they want to take on this role. Yeah. So because in this research we found that if you hand over somebody a new task, it really depends on what the expectation is on the number of tasks. Because if you give too many tasks, then your employee might think you don't do your job. Yeah, you give everything on my shoulder. I have to do everything. You do not. You don't do anything. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's like my boss gives me all my tasks, and I have to work on these now. I'm kind of the slave for my boss now.
Yeah.
But if you give too little task, then the person feels also left alone. And in this situation, they're uncertain. What should I do?
Yeah.
They might feel lonely. They might also feel like I'm not further developed. I'm left behind. So it's really finding the right amount on tasks here. This is a good point. So you really, again, it would be another reason to actually check and communicate with your employees on these tasks and to find out the right mix, the right amount to do so. Also, from our own experience, is like, I guess at the moment in our school and our teams, we have with this new work, with the new changes and everything what we have to do online, it's a lot of learning, it's a lot of new adaptation. So the workload just becomes for everybody a lot, But then checking in and see how best to divide it and how best to support at least can help already a little bit. Yeah. So thanks for these questions. Just to round it up a bit, we started already our take-home messages. So as we said, appreciate the meaningful relationships you have at work and really work on these ones. Be reciprocal. Also motivate others who feel lonely that they actually help others, that they actually become engaged in tasks that are really meaningful.
Be a giving person.
Yeah, they can be not just taking persons, they can be giving persons. Check in, reach out. If you feel lonely, reach out. If you're a manager, try to check in with your team, communicate with them just to find out who feels lonely. Maybe also find an ally in your team who, if you feel, okay, they might not talk to me, maybe you have a person who is more the person who can find out and helps you on that, create clear task structure, especially now in all these tasks potentially change in your job environment. Maybe you can do this with your team together, but find the right balance of that as much as possible. Use nostalgia, as we said. And we had discussions on the social environment. We need this. We need this social world as well. So also one important thing we haven't really talked about, but one thing, we need breaks as well. So switch off your computer, switch off your emails, switch off everything, and just also do a little vacation or something else. If you can go somewhere else, do that. Do it safely, so, and make use of these contexts as well. That hopefully can help you in managing your loneliness at the COVID-19 crisis and after. So we also will offer you after the webinar an article from Hodar. He has written about these topics in our recent RSM Discovery issue, which is fully on the topic of leadership. So, and that's also here the question on managing loneliness. It's focused a bit more on leadership, but the insights we give here, they are much more generalized. That's true,
Yes.
So please read that. It's an easy read.
Only 3 pages.
Only 3 pages. So make use of that. And I think most of this is summarized, as we said. So an interesting read. Also, the whole session will be recorded as well. So also you can contact us, actually. We also will reply on these questions to you. So if you have questions, check again the Leadership Center. Otherwise, I really want to say thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the session and found this information valuable. We'll be sharing answers to some of the questions that we were not able to answer, as well as a recording of today's session, information about the Erasmus Center of Leadership via email in the next few days with you. So thank you, and I wish you a good day and hopefully not so lonely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hodar.
Thank you.